The desert does not keep secrets. It buries them. It is a place of profound absence. An ocean of sand and silence. A place of heat and wind, where the contours of the earth are in constant, slow-motion flux. Beneath this void, somewhere in the western desert of Egypt, lies the answer to one of the greatest military mysteries in human history. It is not a golden city. It is not a pharaoh's treasure. It is a graveyard. A graveyard for 50,000 men. 50,000 sons, brothers, and fathers. An entire generation of an empire's elite, consumed by the sand. In the year 524 BC, a colossal Persian army, the elite of the world's first superpower, marched into this emptiness and vanished from the face of the earth. They were not defeated in any known battle. No survivors ever returned. No prisoners were ever taken. No bodies were ever found. They were, in a single moment of history, simply erased. For 2.5 millennia, their fate has been a ghost story. A legend of a mad king, an offended god, and a storm of divine retribution. This isn't just a story. It's a black hole in the historical record. We have the before, a 50,000-man army, one of the largest forces of its time, marching out from a known location, Thebes. And we have the after, nothing, complete and total silence. It's a historian's nightmare. And it's an archaeologist's ultimate fantasy. But what really happened to the lost army of Cambyses II? Was it truly an act of God, a sandstorm sent to punish a king's arrogance? Was it the greatest logistical failure in ancient history, a colossal military blunder? Or was the entire story a sophisticated lie, a 2,500-year-old cover-up, hiding a military disaster that would have shaken the ancient world to its core? This is the search for the army that walked off the map and into oblivion. To understand why an army was lost, we must first understand the man who sent it. He was not just a king. He was the son of a legend. His name was Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great. His father, Cyrus, was a figure of myth. He founded the Achaemenid Empire, the first true world empire. He was a unifier, a liberator, a genius. He conquered the vast Median Empire. He defeated the impossibly wealthy King Croesus of Lydia. He conquered the impenetrable fortress of Babylon, not by force, but by diverting the Euphrates River and walking his army in on the dry riverbed. He is praised in the Old Testament for freeing the Jewish people from their Babylonian captivity. He was so respected that even his enemies, the Greeks, wrote of him as the ideal ruler. Imagine having that as your father. The pressure on Cambyses must have been immense. Cyrus conquered Babylon. He conquered Lydia. He built an empire from the Indus River to the Mediterranean. What was left for Cambyses to conquer? How could he ever measure up? Cambyses had been his father's co-regent. He had ruled Babylon. He was not inexperienced. But he was not Cyrus. There was only one prize left. The only other great power of the ancient world. The oldest, wealthiest, and most enigmatic civilization on earth, the Kingdom of Egypt. For Persia, Egypt was the final rival. For Cambyses, it was his chance to step out of his father's shadow. In 525 BC, he invaded. The timing was perfect. The long-reigning, politically savvy pharaoh Amasis II had just died, leaving the throne to his son, Psamtik III, who had little experience. And Cambyses did not come alone. He came with a secret weapon. Fans of Halicarnassus, a brilliant Greek mercenary commander who had served Pharaoh Amasis, knew all of his military secrets, and then, after a bitter dispute, defected to the Persians. Fans gave Cambyses everything: the Egyptian battle plans, their troop deployments, and, most importantly, the secret to crossing the deadly Sinai Desert, a pact with the local Bedouin tribes to create hidden water depots for his army, allowing them to bypass the Egyptian frontier defenses. The decisive battle was fought at Pelusium, a fortress city at the mouth of the Nile. Here, legend and history blur. The Greek historian Polyainos, writing centuries later, tells a strange story. He claims Cambyses, knowing the Egyptians worshipped cats as sacred to the goddess Bastet, had a clever, and sacrilegious, idea. He ordered his front-line soldiers to either carry cats, or paint them on their shields. The Egyptian soldiers, terrified of harming the animals and incurring divine wrath, faltered. Their lines broke. The Persians broke their lines and slaughtered them. It's a fantastic story, but many historians doubt it. It's the kind of tale the Greeks love to tell to paint the barbarian Persians as cunning, and the superstitious Egyptians as foolish. The reality is likely more conventional. The Persian army was simply bigger, better led, and more experienced. Egypt, the eternal kingdom, had fallen. Cambyses marched into the capital of Memphis. He captured Psamtik III. He was crowned pharaoh, adopting the full, fivefold titles and traditions of a 5,000-year-old monarchy. He was, by all accounts, the most powerful man on earth. But power is a volatile thing. And our primary source for what happened next paints a dark, terrifying picture. This is Herodotus, the father of history. He traveled through Egypt a few generations after Cambyses and wrote down the stories he heard from the Egyptian priests. And those priests hated Cambyses. We have to be critical of Herodotus. We call him the father of history, but he's also the father of lies. He was an ethnographer, a storyteller. He took what he was told and he wrote it down. He was also a Greek, writing for a Greek audience, and the Greeks hated the Persians. This story of a hubristic Persian king being struck down by the gods? It's perfect propaganda. They told Herodotus that Cambyses was not a conqueror, but a monster, a desecrator. They claimed that upon his conquest, he descended into a violent madness, fueled by what Herodotus calls the sacred disease, or epilepsy, and heavy drinking. He allegedly had his own brother, Smerdis, murdered out of jealousy. He supposedly married two of his own sisters, and then, in a fit of rage, kicked one of them while she was pregnant, killing her and her unborn child. He supposedly had his personal cupbearer, a young boy, shot through the heart with an arrow in front of his father, just to prove his hands weren't shaking from drink. But for the Egyptians, his ultimate sin was the incident of the Apis bull. The Apis bull is not just an animal. It is a god on earth, a living manifestation of the god Ptah. It is chosen by priests based on sacred markings, a white triangle on its forehead, a crescent moon on its flank. When it dies, the entire nation goes into mourning, as if the pharaoh himself had died. It is the most sacred thing in Egypt. According to Herodotus, Cambyses, in a fit of jealous rage, mocked the Egyptians for worshipping a beast. He demanded to see this god. When the bull was brought before him, he drew his dagger and tried to stab it in the belly, but missed, striking it in the thigh. The bull sickened and died from the wound. Cambyses, Herodotus says, laughed, and had the priests scourged. To the Egyptians, this was the ultimate blasphemy. Cambyses had not just killed an animal. He had murdered a god. It's a horrifying story. But is it true? This is where the story gets complicated. We have the sarcophagus for the Apis bull that died during Cambyses' reign. And the inscription on it, written by an Egyptian priest, says that Cambyses, quote, dedicated it as a pious pharaoh. He gave it a full, royal, traditional burial. This is the complete opposite of Herodotus' story. So, was Herodotus lying? Or were the priests forced to write that inscription by the king who had just murdered their god? The ambiguity is total. So who was the real Cambyses? The pious pharaoh, or the mad desecrator? This question is the key, because the answer determines what happened next. Was his next move a calculated, strategic gamble? Or was it the act of a madman? From his new throne in Egypt, Cambyses, now pharaoh, planned to expand his empire to the very edges of the known world. He devised a massive, three-pronged campaign to secure all of Africa. This isn't madness. This is grand strategy. If he pulls this off, he controls all of North Africa, the trade routes through the Sahara, and the gold mines of Nubia. He would have exceeded his father, Cyrus. This is his moment. First, he would send his powerful fleet to conquer the wealthy merchant city of Carthage, in modern-day Tunisia, and secure the entire North African coast. Second, he would lead his main army south, up the Nile, to conquer the mysterious and gold-rich lands of Ethiopia, or Nubia, securing Egypt's southern border. And third, he would dispatch a force west, into the great void of the Libyan desert. The campaign was a disaster from the start. The invasion of Carthage was aborted before it began. His fleet was crewed by Phoenicians, the greatest sailors of the age. But Carthage had been founded by Phoenicians. They were kin, a daughter city. The sailors flatly refused the order to attack their own people. Cambyses, an emperor on land, was powerless at sea. The second prong, the invasion of Ethiopia, was led by Cambyses himself. And it was a catastrophe. Herodotus claims he was completely unprepared for the harsh, barren lands of Nubia. Before he even set out, Herodotus spins a bizarre tale. He says Cambyses sent spies from the Ethiophagi, or fish-eaters, to the Ethiopian king, bearing gifts. But the king, a giant of a man, saw through the ruse. He mocked the gifts and handed the spies a massive Ethiopian bow, telling them that when the Persians could draw that bow, they could invade. Until then, they should be thankful the gods never put it in the minds of the Ethiopians to conquer Persia. Furious at the insult, Cambyses supposedly launched his invasion in a fit of rage, without properly securing supplies. His army marched south, ran out of food, and was decimated by starvation. Herodotus tells a horrifying, if unproven, tale that the soldiers ate their pack animals, then the grass, and then they resorted to casting lots, and eating one in every 10 of their own men. Cambyses, defeated not by an army but by geography, was forced into a humiliating retreat back to Egypt. 2 prongs of his grand ambition were broken. Only the third remained. This army was not a primary invasion force. It was, according to Herodotus, a punitive expedition. A mission of pure, blind vengeance. The target was a small, remote patch of green in a sea of sand, hundreds of miles west of the Nile. It was called the Siwa Oasis. Siwa is special. It's unbelievably remote, even today. It's this tiny island of life in a sea of death. And in antiquity, this remoteness gave it power. It was seen as a place outside of time. A place where the gods spoke clearly. The oracle there, the oracle of Ammon, was so famous it was known to the Greeks, who equated Ammon with their own king of the gods, Zeus. So to them, this was the oracle of Zeus Ammon. People came from all over, Greeks, Libyans, Egyptians, to ask questions of the god, who spoke through his priests. The oracle's word was law. 2 centuries later, Alexander the Great would make a dangerous pilgrimage here across the same desert, risking his entire army, just to have the oracle confirm that he was the son of a god. That's how important Siwa was. But when Cambyses, the new pharaoh, sent messengers to the oracle, the priests, loyal to the old Egyptian regime, apparently gave him a defiant or disrespectful answer. Herodotus is not specific, but it's likely they refused to legitimize his rule. They refused to call him the true son of Ammon, the traditional title of the pharaoh. For Cambyses, reeling from his failures in Carthage and Ethiopia, perhaps slipping into the madness Herodotus described, perhaps furious at this political defiance, this was an insult that could not stand. He would not just conquer the oracle. He would erase it. From his base in Thebes, Cambyses detached a force. Herodotus gives a specific number, 50,000 men. An astonishing figure. He gave them a single, sacrilegious order: march to Siwa, enslave the inhabitants, and burn the temple of the oracle to the ground. The army marched west from Thebes, into the known. Their first stop was the Karga Oasis, the last outpost of civilization, a 7-day march. They arrived, restocked on water, and turned their faces to the unknown. They were now leaving the map. Ahead of them lay 300 miles of the Great Sand Sea, one of the most arid and trackless regions on Earth. And now, we turn to the only passage in history that describes what happened. The only words that survived. Let us read Herodotus, Book 3, Chapter 26. The men, it is said, reached the oasis of Karga, which is 7 days' march from Thebes. After this, they continued their march towards the oracle. But what became of them afterwards, no man can say. None of them ever returned. The Siwans themselves report this, that after the army left the oasis of Karga and was marching through the sand to them, they had reached somewhere halfway when a great and terrible wind came up from the south, a simoom, a red storm. It lifted up vast pillars of sand, and it wholly buried the army, so that not a single man was ever seen again. 50,000 men buried alive. It is one of the most terrifying, cinematic images from the ancient world. But is it true? For centuries, the story was accepted. A perfect parable. A mad king, blinded by hubris, defies the gods. The gods, in turn, unleash the very elements to swallow his army whole. But in the last century, historians, archaeologists, and geologists have begun to question every part of Herodotus's story. We have to be critical of Herodotus. We call him the father of history, but he's also the father of lies. He was an ethnographer, a storyteller. He took what he was told and he wrote it down. He was also a Greek, writing for a Greek audience, and the Greeks hated the Persians. This story of a hubristic Persian king being struck down by the gods? It's perfect propaganda. The first crack in the story, the number 50,000. This is almost certainly an exaggeration. A common trope in ancient history is to make a story more dramatic. Let's be clear about ancient numbers. They are almost all fantasy. Herodotus says Xerxes invaded Greece with 1.7 million men. Modern historians think it was maybe 200,000. Ancient writers used numbers for effect, not for accuracy. 50,000 means an unimaginably large army. It's a literary device. Let's just do the math. A soldier on the march in an arid climate needs, at minimum, 2 gallons of water per day, just for drinking. That's 100,000 gallons of water per day. A gallon weighs 8.3 pounds. That's 830,000 pounds of just water, every single day. Now add water for the thousands of pack animals, the cavalry horses, the support staff. You are talking about a logistical impossibility. They can carry it. There's nowhere to get it. A modern army with tankers and airdrops would struggle. Cambyses' army? No. The number is wrong. 5,000? Maybe. 10,000? A huge stretch. 50,000? It's fantasy. The second crack, the cause of death. The simoom. A sandstorm so violent it could bury an entire army on the march. We call these haboobs. They are terrifying. A wall of dust a mile high, moving at 60 miles per hour. They blot out the sun, the temperature drops. The static electricity is so high your hair stands on end. They are unsurvivable in the open. But do they bury you? No. That's a Hollywood myth. They blast you with fine particulate. You suffocate on the dust. You get disoriented. Your equipment is destroyed. But the storm itself doesn't just dump 50 feet of sand on you. It scours you. It's an executioner, not a grave digger. Geologists agree. A storm is more likely to scatter an army, destroying their supplies and filling their water skins with sand. The sand dunes themselves, the massive Balkan dunes of the Great Sand Sea, migrate. They move, but they move at a rate of feet per year, not feet per minute. They are rivers of sand, not tidal waves. The real cause of death would be what came after the storm, mass dehydration and exposure. They would have died slowly, scattered over miles of desert. The sand would then cover their bodies, but slowly. Over decades. Centuries, which leads to the biggest, most damning question of all. If an army this large died, no matter how, where is the evidence? An army of even 5,000 men would leave a staggering trail of archaeological refuse. We should find bronze arrowheads, iron swords, the metal skeletons of shields, chariot wheels, and pottery. My God, the pottery, millions of shards from their water and food jars, and, of course, bones. Tens of thousands of human and animal skeletons. Even 2,500 years later, the desert preserves. It doesn't destroy. It mummifies. We find Roman camps. We find Neolithic tools. We find caches of wine jars from 5,000 years ago. We find everything. But of this army? This massive military force? Not 0.1% of a find. Nothing. This complete lack of evidence has led to a second, far more explosive theory. A theory that claims there was no sandstorm. that the army did have a battle, and that Herodotus's entire story is a brilliant piece of propaganda, a cover-up for one of the greatest military blunders in Persian history. This is the Catastrophic theory. In 2003, historian Olaf Kaper, excavating at the Dakhtla oasis, made a startling connection. He pointed out that Herodotus was writing 70 years after the event, based on what the Sawan priests, the very priests whose temple Cambyses sought to destroy, told him. What if they lied to protect a far darker secret? Kaper's theory is brilliant. It recontextualizes everything. He suggests the Persian army was not marching on Siwa at all. That was a fake target. Their real target was the Dakhtla oasis, much further south. Why? Because that's where the real threat was. We know from other sources, including Demotic papyri and inscriptions, that when Cambyses died a few years later, the Persian Empire erupted in rebellion, and one of those rebels was a powerful Egyptian noble, a self-proclaimed pharaoh and a member of the old royal line, named Cambyses III. The theory goes like this. Cambyses III had raised a large rebel army in the western desert, operating out of the Dakhtla and Kargil oases. He was a genuine threat to the new, fragile Persian control of Egypt. The 50,000 men sent by Cambyses were not on a petty, punitive mission against an oracle. They were a serious counterinsurgency force, sent to find and destroy this rebel army. But they failed. The Egyptians, who knew the desert like the back of their hand, lured the heavily armored Persian army deep into the waterless void between the oases. They used guerrilla tactics. They poisoned wells. They ambushed the supply lines, and finally, somewhere near the Dakhtla oasis, they cornered the exhausted, thirsty, and disoriented Persians, and they massacred them. It wasn't an act of God. It was a devastating, humiliating military defeat for the Persian Empire. This would be a catastrophe. To admit that 50,000, or even 10,000 of their elite troops were wiped out by a ragtag band of Egyptian rebels? It's unthinkable. It would be like a modern superpower losing a division to an unorganized militia. It would inspire rebellions everywhere. So, a story was born. A cover-up, conceived by the Persians or perhaps even by the victorious Egyptians themselves. Think about it. The Persians get a divine excuse that hides their military incompetence. The Egyptians get a terrifying propaganda story. The gods of Egypt protect us. They sent a sandstorm to swallow our enemies. It's the perfect alibi. It blames no human. It explains the lack of survivors. And, best of all, it serves as a terrifying warning to anyone who would dare defy the gods of Egypt. This theory gains even more traction when you look at who came after Cambyses. Cambyses died a few years later in 522 BC, on his way back to Persia, under very mysterious circumstances. The man who took the throne was his distant relative, Darius I. Darius's entire reign began with him crushing rebellions. His most famous monument, the Behistun inscription, is a giant billboard carved into a mountain, listing all the liar kings he defeated. And on that list? A rebel in Egypt. This wasn't a minor skirmish. This was a full-blown war for the throne. The lost army story, which makes Cambyses look insane and incompetent, makes Darius, the man who restored order, look like the savior. This theory explains the why and the how. But it still leaves the where. If the army was massacred, the bodies, and the weapons, must still be out there. The search for the lost army has tantalized explorers for a century. The most famous was the Hungarian aristocrat, Count Laszlo Almasi, the real-life English patient. In the 1930s, while mapping the unknown reaches of the Libyan desert, he became obsessed with the story. He used Herodotus as his map, searching the routes between the oases, but found only endless sand and prehistoric cave paintings. The trail went cold for decades. The desert, it seemed, was determined to hold its silence. Then, in November 2009, the world's media exploded with a single headline: Lost Army of Cambyses Found. Two Italian archaeologists, twin brothers named Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione, claimed they had found it. For years, they had been focusing their search not on the traditional route, but much farther south, near the border of Sudan. They presented a stunning collection of evidence. A mass grave filled with human bones. Persian-style bronze arrowheads. A silver bracelet. Pieces of a horse's bridle. And, crucially, pottery from the Achaemenid period. It seemed to be the smoking gun. The Castiglione theory was that the army had taken a different, more southerly route, been caught in the Samum, and taken refuge in a large rock formation, where they were buried alive. The world celebrated. The mystery was solved, but almost immediately, the academic community fired back. The Castiglione discovery was problematic. The artifacts were real, but they were found scattered over a wide area, near a known trade route. This is exactly what you'd expect to find from centuries of Bedouin and Roman-era traffic. The mass grave was more likely a common burial ground, unrelated to the Persians. There was no C14 dating. There was no peer review. The arrowheads were of a type used for centuries, all over the region. The pottery was Persian era, but not definitively Persian military. It was archaeology by press conference, not by publication. The Castiglione discovery, once celebrated, was largely dismissed by mainstream archaeology. It was another false dawn. The lost army of Cambyses had slipped back into the realm of legend, but the hunt is not over. Today, it's being waged not with shovels, but from space. The Great Sand Sea is one of the largest, most inhospitable places on the planet. You can't excavate it, but you can scan it. We use satellite imagery, thermal, multispectral, to look for anomalies. We use ground-penetrating radar. The dunes move. They are alive, migrating with the wind. An army buried 20 feet deep one century might be briefly exposed to the air the next. We look for shadows, subtle discolorations in the soil, magnetic anomalies from buried metal, a shield, a sword, a helmet. Hidden just beneath the sand, they are searching for a needle in a moving haystack. A faint metallic signature, a cluster of human bones, a 2,500-year-old footprint in a sea of sand. The search area is the size of a small country. The task is monumental. So, where does that leave us? We have a ghost story, told by Herodotus, of a divine storm that punished a king's hubris. We have a logistical nightmare, of an army defeated by its own arrogance, dying of thirst under a brutal sun. And we have a political thriller, of a devastating military defeat and a brilliant 2,500-year-old cover-up. In the end, all three theories might be true. Cambyses, in his rage, did order an impossible mission. His generals, in their incompetence, did fail to supply it. And the army, lost and dying, was picked off by local rebels. The Samum was just the final, poetic nail in the coffin. A perfect excuse for everyone. Perhaps the mystery of the lost army endures not despite the lack of evidence, but because of it. The void in the desert has created a void in our history, and we have rushed to fill it with stories of mad kings, angry gods, and vast conspiracies. It is a story that warns of the terrifying power of nature, the fragility of empire, and the deadly consequences of arrogance. It reminds us that no matter how powerful we become, how vast our armies or how grand our ambitions, we are always at the mercy of the elements. Somewhere out there, beneath the wind and the sand, the truth of what happened in 524 BC is waiting. The 50,000 dead still have a story to tell, but the desert is a patient guardian. It holds its secrets well. And for now, it holds its silence.